Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir, and this is where we explore how to make learning more meaningful and dynamic and transformative. Epic, so students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. All right, welcome back to the show. So glad that you're here. I'm recording this the week after Thanksgiving break, and I'm feeling a little rejuvenated. It was a lot of family time, a lot of busyness, but also a lot of time of just laughing and eating and laying around, which is good for the soul, and I'm hoping you had a similar experience because, you know, that first semester of the school year, it'll take its toll on you a little bit. I've always thought of Thanksgiving as kind of like that target. It's like, all right, if I can make it to that, I can refill my battery and then make it the rest of the year until you get an even more extended break. So I'm hoping you are feeling filled up. And if not, I'm hoping you can find that energy elsewhere because sometimes you need it. But anyway, I am glad that you're listening today. I was sitting around yesterday and for some reason, this fun little memory popped into my head about when I took my students outside to build fires during school. And I was like, wait a minute, you've never recorded a podcast episode about this. So here we are. I want to tell you about a story. And the reason I thought of it yesterday is because we have been getting some snow here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It has been dumping on us all weekend. And we had similar conditions to this one year that I was teaching. And we were just getting snow and more snow. And I was like, I've got an idea. And so one time, and it was already in my curriculum that I was going to have my students read the short story to build a fire. But then I was like, wait a minute, what if we went and did it after we read the story? And so if you've ever read that story, if you haven't read that story, it's about a guy that should not be out in the cold. He's trying to get to a logging camp, and it's like below zero. I think it's like -30, and he decides to do the hike anyway to get to this logging camp. And along the way, he falls through the ice, and he gets really, really cold, and he has to build a fire. And if he can't get a fire starting, he's not going to make it. And so he has, I think, 3 matches, and he starts a fire, and I think he's down to his last match, but he finally gets a fire going, but he doesn't realize that there's a there's a branch above him covered, or should I say, it's the Christmas season, laden in snow, and it gets heated up by his fire, and then it falls down and it crashes onto his fire and puts it out, and the man freezes to death. And so it's a classic story, and I was like, well, wouldn't it be fun if we read this as a class, and then we go out behind the school into the snow, out by these woods on the other side of this field, and we use the exact same supplies the man in the story has to see if we can build a fire as well. And so that's what we did. So my first hour, I was like, all right, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to read this book, and then I've got a surprise for you. And so we read this short story. They all enjoyed it. And I said, all right, now I want you to follow me. And we walked across this field, and we had a big competition. I gave everybody a bundle of sticks, 3 matches, and I said, go. And students had to try to build a fire. And it was so much fun. And I think in that first hour, only one group actually successfully built a fire, but they got it raging, and it was huge, and everyone went and stood around it. And then I busted out some marshmallows because why not? And we all roasted marshmallows, and it was just one of those moments that you remember as a teacher. But I have to imagine that those students remember that as a student, right? Like, it's the kind of thing that sticks out to you. It's good, it's exciting, it's community, it's outdoors, it's hands-on, and it was so much fun. And then we walked back into the school, and my students are just full of that joy and energy. And class got out, and they went out into the hallway. And as I'm preparing for my next class and I'm getting the short stories together so that we can do it all over again, my principal pops his head in real quick, and he comes up, he says, hey, did you take kids out to build fires? I said, yes, yep, but we did it after we read this book. It was awesome. He's like, that's great, but I'm getting complaints from a couple other educators, teachers in the school about the smoke smell on students, the campfire smell. So we probably can't do that the rest of this day. was like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, sorry, we can't do it. And he just turns and walks out. And I remember just being like, wait, this was one of the funnest things I've ever done as a teacher, right? Like it was so fun, but it was also directly connected to the curriculum, right? Like while we're out there building fires, we were talking about the book and we were commenting on the suspense and the conflict and the character, and we were laughing, and there was just this direct tie between this hands-on joyful experience and the reading and the ELA and what we were learning. And I remember he left and I was just feeling so disappointed about this and frustrated. And I remember as students were walking back into the room, and I was like, well, now I've got to break the news to them, because of course word spreads. I mean, kids are walking in right away and they're like, oh, Mr. Muir, I heard we get to go outside and I heard we get to have marshmallows. And I was like, all right, well, go grab a seat. And so I was just preparing to announce to the class that we were not going to be able to go outside because of some complaints. And I was just about to break the news, and I had to do it respectfully because you can't throw anybody under the bus. And by the way, I get it. Like I understand the bind the principal was in. If he's getting complaints or whatever it is, he has to make the best decision. So I get it, but I'm also disappointed. And so I'm just about to make that announcement when all of a sudden my principal, Scott, walks in the door. He goes, hey, Mr. Muir, I changed my mind. Go build fires. I said, what's the catch? He said, no catch. Go have fun, guys. And then he says to my class, you guys are going to love this class today. And he turns and walks out of the room. I'm like, what is going on here? And so we pulled out the short stories and we read the books. We read the story, and then we went outside, and the rest of that day I got to take my classes out and we built these fires. And it still is cemented as one of my favorite days I've ever taught. And we've done this a couple of years, but man, that first year threw me for a loop because it was just all joy and then disappointment and then joy again. And I remember at the end of that day, I went and I found my principal and I said, hey, Scott, why'd you change your mind? What happened? And he smiles and he goes, well, after I went and talked to you, I was walking back to my office and I heard a bunch of your students in the hallway just raving about the experience. And they were all just so excited about it. And I asked them and they told me exactly what you guys did. And they just were so happy and excited that he was like, you know what? I think a few complaints are worth students being that excited about English class. And that's what Scott said to me. And it just lit me up. I'm like, oh, he listened. He listened to the students. He listened to me. He revised his thinking based on new information. And I got to tell you, I learned such a strong lesson about leadership that day and about teaching. Is that adaptability and flexibility matters. And it matters for the people you're serving. It matters for yourself. It allowed this great thing to happen. And I have so much admiration for the way my principal adapted his thinking in that moment, right? His decisions weren't fixed. He stayed open as new information came in. And to me, this can sometimes feel a little rare, but also really valuable in education when we have this space, this mindset to be flexible and to adapt. Because I tell you, I've said it about 6 times now. I'll say it one more. 6, I'll say it 7th. 6, 7. It was one of the best days ever in the classroom, and it could only happen because of adapting, right? Because he was willing to do that. There has been times where I have been so stuck to rules simply because I said them out loud, right? Because I stated them, and all of a sudden I feel like this obligation that I have to stick to them because they've been stated. Even though, actually, no, sometimes rules and decisions can be bended, right? You can break rules sometimes, especially if you made them, right? Especially if the benefit of bending them or stepping past them outweighs keeping them. Does that make sense? Right? Just because they were stated doesn't mean that they are sacred, right? Just because there's a tradition sometimes doesn't mean that you can't find your way around it if there is this measurable benefit to it. And I can think of so many different times that I have, had these rules that I felt like, oh no, you're supposed to do this. And then you step back and you're like, wait a minute, are you supposed to do this? Right? Is that actually the best learning experience just because that was a stated rule? And I use the fire experience as an example, but I think there's a lot of them, right? But I mean, I see the fire experience and it's like, all right, my principal made that decision originally because he wanted to respect what he was hearing from other people. But then he got new information and he said, you know what? I think the benefit outweighs the harm, or the benefit outweighs the inconvenience. And he even told me he went and talked to those teachers that had complaints and he explained it to them. And he said they got on board. They're like, oh, okay. So it's like, yeah, it took some work to adapt, right? The flexibility didn't just come with, hey, go do whatever you want. Like it came with a little bit of effort, but we look back at it and it's like, well, clearly that effort was worth it. You know, I think about when I've taught poetry before. I remember one time I assigned students to write a poem, and I wasn't super rigid on the rhyming rules, how much students had to rhyme during it, but I did say like, hey, I want there to be some rhyming in it. And then I remember one of my students turned in this free verse poem, and she was so excited about what she wrote. Like it was so good, and it really was like the main, if I remember correctly, their main idea behind this assignment was to create imagery, right? Like make really strong images to help the reader or the listener to really imagine what you're writing about in your poem. And so it was all about using imagery, but then I suggested, but then also like had a spot in the rubric about having some rhyming in there as well, because that's what I always did writing poetry. It's like, oh yeah, I have rhyming, right? And this wasn't even a rhyming poetry assignment, but it's like, no, it's a poem. It needs to have rhyming in it. And so she turned this in and there was no rhyming. And I remember reading it being like, this is so good. Like she nailed this, but I have to mark her down because she didn't rhyme and the rubric says to rhyme. So I look at that, I'm like, well, no, maybe you could talk to her and be like, hey, I suggest maybe adding some rhyming. But the fact is, what I was really going for was can you use imagery correctly? And you did it, and you did it really well. Maybe I need to omit that from the rubric for her, right? Is it really actually valuable to keep that in the rubric, or do I need to bend that rule a little bit? Now, if I'm trying to make sure that she's following directions, if that's the main idea behind this creative writing assignment, is that can you follow directions in your creative writing? Well, then maybe I do need to keep that part of the rubric. But I don't know about you, but I don't think writing really strong poetry and creative writing is all about following rules. It's about finding your voice and creating something beautiful that's never existed before. And I don't want to kill that just because I made a rule behind it, right? Or in a similar way, and I'm open to pushback on this, but you know, how many times have, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, that I got marked down on a math problem, not because I got the answer incorrect, but because I didn't follow the exact method in getting there. And I understand, like, no, sometimes it's about learning a certain method because math builds upon itself. But sometimes it's like, well, actually, if there's multiple ways to get there and students took one that I wasn't planning for, but it still got them to where I wanted them to go, and they're understanding math and they're making those neural connections, and the point of math class is still being achieved. It's like, well, do I need to stick to that rigidity, or is it possible to bend a little bit? You know, or maybe you've done silent reading before. And it's like, all right, the instructions are to keep the room quiet. And this is me. I'm telling a story from my own classroom. You're supposed to be quiet during silent reading. But then all of a sudden, I've got two kids sitting next to each other, and they're reading Harry Potter, and they're reading it like alongside each other, and they start laughing because a funny part happened. And then they start talking a little bit about what they're reading. It's like, well, do I need to enforce silence there? Or maybe I need to be more flexible because there's some joy happening. And isn't that the reason that we do silent reading, is to find some joy in reading, to develop practices of sitting quietly and reading, but that also might mean talking about what you're reading or laughing about what you're reading and breaking a little bit of the silence. I just think that we need to find ways to be flexible in our work sometimes. Now, obviously there's important to have boundaries, right? Like if something's unsafe or it's disruptive, yeah, the boundary stands. Or in the same way, like if the assignment is trying to find, can you do this thing? It's like, well, then no, I can't omit that because that's what I'm trying to, that's my objective here. And so I think a lot of this comes down to what is the objective of our classes? Like what is the objective of an assignment? What's the objective of school as a whole? right? This is a question I've been asking a lot because I'm working on this book that's tentatively titled The Portrait of a Graduate, asking what do we want, what do we need students to be like after the school experience so that they can thrive in this world with AI, this world with technology, this world with remote working, this world that seemingly is having a major collaboration problem and a critical thinking problem. What do we want students to be able to develop in school so they can be able to use it in life? And that's something I hear over and over in my research and interviews as I'm, crafting this book, is that students have to be flexible. They need adaptability. I sat down with a VP for a big furniture company, an industrial furniture company recently, and I asked him, his name's Jeff. I said, Jeff, what's the number one thing that you look for in the employees that you hire? He said, the number one thing is an adaptable mindset, right? That you are able to shift and pivot as needed because you're needing to do it a bunch, right? With all of the advent of technology, we are in a revolution right now. And I don't know if it'll last forever. I think we'll hopefully level out at some point, but we are in the thick of it right now. And it's not just in education and school, it is in the workforce. And he was telling me all about it. And we can, that'll be in the book, but we'll do some podcasts and sometime soon where we can get into some of the stuff I'm learning about what the workforce is looking for. But it's like, there is a lot going on. And he says the people who are going to keep their jobs over the next 10 years are the people who know how to adapt and bring something to the table that only humans can bring, right? And that requires pivoting and shifting and learning new things on the spot. And so when I think about our work as educators, we have to be able to do that ourselves, because one of the best things we can do to teach students a valuable competency like adaptability or collaboration or problem solving or critical thinking or work ethic or communication, one of the best things we can do to teach those skills, those competencies, is to model it ourselves, right? Innovation often comes from breaking an old rule and trying a better idea. And so I think sometimes we have to actually do that. And I know it's not easy. I know there's so many different factors that make innovating hard, that make flexibility a challenging thing to do. And you know what they are, right? There's a lot in the way of that. But when we model that ourselves, when we show students, hey, we can pivot here, or, ooh, I like the direction we're going here, let's make some changes and keep following that because you're clearly into that right now. When we do that, it's showing them how to be flexible. It's showing adaptability. When my principal was adaptable in that situation, that taught me as a teacher how to be more flexible and adaptable, right? He modeled it for me. He gave me permission to be flexible. And I think we can do the same thing with students. I think we can help them learn to be more adaptable, but in order to do that, we have to find ways to be more adaptable ourselves. And I think there's a lot of different ways we can do that. I think I know one that can help us with this is actually using AI in our work. And I get a lot of pushback about this, and I am totally open to it. But I have found over and over and over from my own experiences, but then also from so many educators I talk to, that know if I can use AI well, I can be more adaptable and come up with new creative ideas so much faster than I used to be able to. And the reason I get pushback is people are rightfully saying, like, well, isn't that kind of skipping steps when you do that, when you use AI to just come up with a creative idea really quickly instead of doing it yourself? It's like, well, yeah, it definitely skips steps. But the truth is, because of all of the things you have to do as an educator, whether you're a teacher, a parapro, or a counselor, or whatever you do, there's so many things you have to do that you often have very little capacity to shift and come up with new things on the spot, or to change the direction of a lesson, but then make sure that you're still covering the content you need to cover, because there's just not necessarily enough time to do that. Planning periods are often filled with assessment, or going home at night is, I'm grading and I'm preparing for the next unit or whatever it is, that it's really hard to differentiate or shift or pivot and allow yourself to be flexible because there's so many other things to do. But man, I'm telling you, if you can learn how to use a tool like ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard or Magic School or whatever it is that you use, if you can use it, it can help you actually pivot and change and creatively come up with ideas so quickly that you're able to be more adaptable in the classroom. For instance, like let's say that you have this whole lesson planned and you plan to have students talk and discuss about a certain thing. And it's really about developing discussion skills or learning this content. But then all of a sudden it starts going a direction you weren't planning for. And you're like, gosh, it would be really great to have a follow-up discussion on this. But my follow-up discussion was supposed to be on this topic. Well, I'm telling you, you can go take those prompts that you are going to have that follow-up discussion on. You can go plug them into ChatGPT and say, hey, our discussion was going this direction, but I still need to cover discussion questions like this. Write me new discussion questions that help me make that pivot. It will just kick it out so darn quick. And if you don't like it, you can just say, hey, do it again. Or nope, let's keep tweaking this. And it'll come up with new questions so quick that you can say, all right, great. Now we can actually move the discussion in this new place. And I don't have to spend a ton of time to do that. Now, could you have just sat down and written all new discussion questions and maybe a whole new activity to go alongside with it? And maybe, you probably could. Of course you could have done that. But would you have done that? Would you have had time to do that? Would you have had the creative energy and mind power juice at the end of a school day to be able to go home and do that? Or probably not. Or I know in my experience, I definitely have had ideas that I just haven't been able to pursue. But all of a sudden it's like, well, we have this tool that can help you do that, right? If students are confused or bored or fascinated by something unexpected, AI can instantly generate an alternate mini lesson or a practice set or a hands-on activity or a different explanation so quickly that you can do that. And you're showing them, hey, yeah, we can flex, right? I don't have to stay rigid because we can still cover what we need to cover. And there's so many different applications of this, whether it's, differentiating on the fly. You can ask AI to produce leveled text or alternative problem sets or, scaffold writing supports or extension tasks for advanced learners. There's so many different things that you can do quickly because you have this tool that can help you do it. And so, this isn't just a pitch for AI. This is a pitch for doing more creative work and doing more flexible work and being able to really help your students learn the way they need to and find joy in what they're doing. And so we have that capability to do that now. Because here's the truth, flexibility, while it can throw curveballs, man, it creates more joy in the learning process, right? When school feels real, when it feels like surprising, when it doesn't always feel like, oh, I am going and I'm following this exact thing all the time, but instead, I don't know what to expect today. I don't know exactly what class is going to look like, but we're going to see together. It's like, well, that fills your cup. And I know that fills my cup as an adult, right? Like I want to know that there's some unexpected. I also want to have boundaries. I also want to have a little bit of a script to life. I want to be able to expect some things, but I also want there to be some surprises to life. And so do students. And so when we become more flexible, we introduce more joy in learning, right? It also creates stronger trust between teachers and leaders and students, right? Like I'm telling you, when my principal said, hey, go out there and build fires, it made me feel loved. It made me feel trusted. And it's the same with students. One time I was doing this documentary project. I've told you about it before, where students are creating documentaries for World War II veterans. And a student was like, hey, Mr. Muir, can I create a podcast instead? My initial reaction was like, nope, we're creating documentaries. But then I was like, well, wait a minute. That would be kind of cool to make a podcast. And it would take just as much work. And he would still have to research. And he'd still have to learn to edit. And he'd still have to collaborate. Yeah, you can do a podcast. He's like, great, thanks, Mr. Muir. It's like, yes, right? Like there's like this trust that forms when we are flexible. So I just think there are so many reasons that we can learn to be more flexible. And I know it can be a challenge, but I think it's a worthy one. So we can let new information guide us, right? We can stay open and stay adaptable and realize that some of the best moments in teaching come from the courage, the bravery to adjust. So thanks so much for listening to this episode. Good to be back in the podcast booth here at my local library in Ada, Michigan, to talk about flexibility and talk about teaching with you. I hope the start of this holiday season is a good one for you. Thanks for all of the great work you do. If you would like to find more of my work, I created a little video on this story and just a really snippet of this, but it might be valuable to watch or share with anyone. That's on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook at Trevor Muir or the Epic Classroom. And I am writing a book on the Portrait of a Graduate. So keep an eye out for more information about that. If you're not on my email list yet, I would love for you to join. I send podcast episodes, but also articles and videos and resources every single week that I think you'd like. So we get to stay connected that way. Thanks, friends. Talk to you next time.